Welcome back to Matrim's Mutterings. This is Matt. Today we're going to talk about what is social Marxism. Now you may have heard this term if you venture onto Facebook at any time, or if you read newspaper articles in conservative or left-wing newspapers, if you get your news off YouTube, or even in general conversation, you've probably heard the term social Marxism. It's often used by conservatives. If you listen to people like Andrew Bolt or Paul Murray or Peter Credlin on Sky News, or Rowan Dean from The Spectator, you'll have heard this word quite a bit. If you read The Spectator regularly, you probably already understand what this word means. But I wanted to explain to you what social Marxism is, because this is an ever-growing movement in our society. It's having more and more influence, particularly in our universities, in our academic system, in our media, in different areas. And so I wanted to explain what social Marxism is, and also understand why it's really dangerous. To understand social Marxism, we first need to understand what Marxism is, or Marxist communism. So everyone has heard of communism. The big battle of the 20th century, from the late 40s right basically to the early 90s, was the West versus communism. But even though many people have heard the term communism, a lot of people might have a very vague idea what it is. So effectively, communism is a collectivist political movement, the goal of which is to spread wealth evenly throughout society so that no one has any more or less than his or her neighbor. The goal of communist Marxism is complete equality of outcome. Everyone in society is equal. Everyone in society has the same thing. Everyone in society earns the same amount. No one is better off. No one is able to get ahead financially. It's enforced equality of outcome. Now, communists view the world in a very interesting way. They see the history of the world through the lens of class struggles. Basically, the way Marx and Friedrich Engels, looked at world history as it was a series of class struggles between the rich and the poor. You had the feudal lord and his serf. In the time of Marx and Engels, it was the battle between the bourgeois and the proletariat. The bourgeois being the merchant class, the middle class, the upper middle class, and the proletariat being the working class, the employed class, the people who work in the factories or work on the farms, whereas the bourgeois are the people who own the factories and who own the farms. Effectively, the way Marx and Engels envisioned the future was that it was good for us to progress towards a time of complete equality, where there's no wealthy landowners, there's no poor inner city street urchins. Everyone is equal. So, in a sense, Marx and Engels saw the bourgeois as exploiters of the working class. Now, it's interesting because there is a bit of truth in that, especially if you look at the capitalist system in the days of Marx and Engels, because there was one thing which was a big problem in the Western world at the time because of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a good thing for the world. It's what progressed us towards the modern society in which we live. The technologies which were invented, the factories that were built, the work which was created, the skilled jobs which were created, all progressed society. It changed society from a largely agrarian society to an urban society in the Western world. And it's one of the reasons why the West became so dominant over the rest of the world. So the Industrial Revolution was good, and capitalism and the free market system helped facilitate that. But there is some truth in Marx and Engels' criticism of this capitalist system, because it can tend towards exploitation. So, for example, we had problems with child workers, kids working, for example, in matchbox factories, where working around dangerous chemicals, just making matches, kids working in all sorts of different places. And so there were social activists at the time who were arguing for better labor conditions, which is a good thing, and getting kids out of these factories, which is a good thing. We are against child labor in the modern world today. So Marx and Engels made some good criticisms of the capitalist system. It can tend towards exploitation. It can be corruptly used to oppress people. But overall, the bourgeois class do not oppress the proletariat. The merchant class, the business owners employ the working class. Think of our society today. Most people work for small businesses. But most small businesses look after their employees, want their employees to have a good life, want them to earn an income. It's really tricky for a business owner because they've got to balance feeding their own family and making their own profit as opposed to paying their workers and making sure that they can feed their families. I know a really good friend who's a business owner at the moment. He just went through a hard time this recently, and he was saying to me, he said, Matt, I really need this business problem to be solved because I've got people that count on me. I've got people that work for me. The heart of many business owners is to make money, yes, but not at the exploitation of their workers, but to the benefit of their workers. If the business makes more money, the employees make more money. And so the idea that the bourgeois is always the oppressor of the proletariat is a very stupid way to look at society. In saying that, there's also some truth in it, because the wealthier classes can take advantage of the poorer classes, not pay them enough, not give them, say in the United States, health insurance, for example. In Australia, you see these battles between the unions and companies on how much they should get paid. And sometimes the workers are right, sometimes the business owners are right. But the whole of society is not just a struggle between this class oppressing the other class. Society is much more complex than that. Their goal, as I said, is a society where everyone is equal, not an opportunity. Not just that you have an opportunity to get ahead, not just in value and dignity, as we must believe as human beings, especially as a Christian. We believe that everyone is created in God's image and that everyone is equal in dignity and value. But their goal is a society where everyone's outcome and status is equal. There are no wealthy and poor, just workers who have enough of everything they need. In other words, they want everything to be owned in common by everyone because they believe that in this there will be equality. Because as long as somebody is able to own land, they're able to own more and more land and make wealth off that land, and in Marx and Engels' view, oppress those who do not have that land. And there may be some truth in that, but overall, it is a good thing for people to be able to own their own property because they can then invest in it and make money, and it advances the economic system of society. Without farmers owning their land and being dedicated to their land in this country, we wouldn't have as strong economy as we do. It's not the only aspect of the economy, there are other parts, but it's the same with people who own mines, or people who own restaurants, or people who own things like Dreamworld. They own these, they invest back into them because they want to make money, and it all adds to the economy. The idea that nobody should own anything is an incredibly devastating way to run a society. In fact, Frederick Engels said this in the Communist Manifesto: in this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. So the goal of communists is to abolish private property so the state to the people, the state is made up of the people, own everything. Everyone is just a worker for the state. Everyone in the state owns everything. Now, they sought to achieve this goal firstly by outlawing private property to spread the wealth, dismantling the family, and destroying inheritance rights. Why would they do this? Because the family is one of the strongest ways in which to pass on wealth to the next generation. Think about it. Take a family that hasn't been devastated by divorce. Each generation of that family has stayed together. Each generation of that family has worked hard to make sure that they build up wealth. Each generation of that family has worked hard to make sure that the next generation is more educated and is able to get ahead in a better way to the generation before it. In this way, families strongly build up wealth, and then they pass on that wealth to their children. Now, Marxists and social Marxists find this infuriating because they don't think it's fair that some punk kid should be able to inherit billions of dollars off their business mogul parents and not have to give a big chunk of it back to society, because in their view, private property leads to the extension of oppression. Because remember, in their view, those who have are the oppressors of those who have not. So they wanted to dismantle the family, because when you dismantle the family, you dismantle the motivation to build wealth and pass on wealth to the next generation. You destroy the stable base in which that wealth is made. And alongside of that, you destroy private property. So you get rid of two of the main things which enable wealth to be passed on to the next generation. And they do this because they want to take this wealth and spread it out to everyone in society. Now this was devastating in the Russian Revolution. Jordan Peterson talks about this quite a bit in his videos, but when in parts of Russia the people were kicked off their land, the farmers, they were quite prosperous. What was the result? Famine, because their expertise, their passion for the land and their desire to work it was all lost, and those who the land was spread out amongst were not able to get out of the land what the previous owners got. So it might sound good to take all the millions of dollars in the world and spread it among everyone equally, but it has devastating effects. Now, to aid the destruction of the family and private property, they also believe you need to de-establish religion, because religious freedom and freedom of conscience help to create the environment for free market capitalism. I find this fascinating that Marx actually admitted this, because you find a lot of atheists and a lot of those to the left actually seek to deny that religion has a positive impact in society. Now, I guess Marx does not see freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and freedom and the free market as a positive impact on society. But we cannot deny that it was the free market which led to more prosperity in the world than anything else. Freedom of conscience, the ability to believe what you want to believe, and freedom of association, the ability to associate with those who believe similar to you, are sacred freedoms which we hold in the West, which have enabled us to have the healthy and strong society that we have. So Marx was avidly against these things, and he wanted to see religion de-established because he wanted to take away the framework in which these things were created. Now, they also needed to get the children away from being educated in the home and educated by the state. Hence, homeschooling was discouraged or banned, and public schools became the norm, or as Marx called them, and Engels called them, social schooling. Now, their goal of this was very simple. See, it frustrated them that the bourgeois had means. You know, you would hire a nanny, the nanny would educate your children, the children would be raised up in the culture of the family, they would be trained up in how to raise, the trade of their father or the business of their father, and they would be doing this completely independent of any intervention from the state. Now, Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx absolutely found this abhorrent, because their goal, remember, is equality of outcome. Not equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. So they want to make sure everyone in society is educated by the state, has the ideology of the state and the goals of the state in mind, and it's why in a lot of communist countries, private schools and homeschooling were outlawed. Now this is fascinating when you think about it, but this goes towards them achieving their goals of leveling everything out. They don't want to have high achievers over here and low achievers down here. They want everything to be equal, equality of outcome. The communists were also against nationalism and were big proponents of globalism, because those who are nationalistic will fight for their national pride and will fight for their national cultures and traditions. Whereas if you have a more globalistic outlook, you're much less likely to want to defend what is distinctive about your culture, and you can create allies across the world from many different cultures and enable you to push the Marxist vision even larger. Now, globalism in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. There's been a lot of positive benefits about globalization. For example, you may not know this, but poverty across the world on a global scale has decreased as a result of globalization. There's an enrichment from other cultures. So many good things can come through globalization. One of the negative impacts and things which Marx and Engels saw as positive is that it can etch away that national pride, which enables you to defend the traditions of your society, which includes the religious traditions, the family traditions, the free market traditions, and the way your society is structured. They wanted to advocate for anything which would help etch these things away, because their goal was to completely reshape society. So for the communists, a utopia is where everyone has everything equally. Now, to some people this sounds like a utopia, but it actually turned out to be a dystopia. It turned out to be incredibly brutal. And even Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto and other writings recognized that violence and brutality would be needed to lead towards the change. So when people say to you, communism hasn't really been tried because people are so violent, and communism is not a violent system, and communism is about peace, love, and everybody having what's equal. When people say something like that to you, you can know that they're full of it, because Marx and Engels themselves recognized that violent means would need to be used to get society moving in the direction they wanted. Listen to this. This is from the Communist Manifesto. This is Marx and Engels. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be affected, this absolute change in society, except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of the bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the modes of production. So in the communist system, all the modes of production need to be taken over by the state. To do this, all private property needs to be abolished, and to get private property out of the hands of those who have it, despotic or authoritarian and violent means need to be used in taking that property out of people's hands to get the ball rolling. Now, as the ball gets rolling, then you can start to bring some of the other aspects of the communist system into play, because you've moved society in the direction of everyone having ownership of everything. Now they want to so effectively, even though people say that Stalinist and Leninist Russia didn't put communism into practice the way it was supposed to be done because of the violent way it was brought about, that's exactly what Marx and Engels believed was necessary to get the ball rolling. You have to use violence at the beginning. You have to use despotic means. Think about that. You have to use despotic means because people naturally gravitate towards defending their personal freedoms, defending their property rights, defending their family, and defending their religion. These are things which people hold sacred and special, and which people will want to hold on to. They're not things which people will want to give up willingly. So Marx recognized that to achieve equality of outcome, you needed to use despotic means. So this is kind of a bit of a summary of what communist Marxism is. Obviously you can read books to understand it a little bit more. But like I said, it's important to understand what communism is and what Marxism is, so that we can understand what social Marxism is. So effectively, social Marxists have switched out the clash between the working class and the privileged bourgeois and replaced it with a clash between the privileged white male and everybody else. It is still a clash between groups. It is still a collectivist ideal, but the distinguishing markers are now gender, race, sexuality, and the amount of oppression or lack of oppression that one faces in this world is based on the intersection of your various group identities. So, social Marxism is still viewing the world in the lens of oppressor versus oppressed, or oppressor over the oppressed, or oppressed fighting against the oppressor. Social Marxists still see the world in the system. It's why you will hear people on the far left, not the center left, but the far left, say crazy stuff like, oh, we're oppressing Asian people in our society, we oppress women in our society, we oppress black people in our society. The reason they say this is because they see those in the majority, who they see as the haves, are always oppressing those who are the have-nots. By virtue of being a white male, I am, by definition, as much an oppressor as the bourgeois was by definition an oppressor, according to Marx. So we have what Dave Rubin calls the oppression Olympics, and it basically works like this. At the top of the pile, according to the social Marxists, we have white privileged male, particularly Christian white privileged male, because we are the ones who are most represented in society, because if you look at most politicians are white Christian males, particularly in the United States, places like that. According to them, that means that we are the most oppressive class, we have the most privilege, and therefore everyone who is not a white privileged male lacks that privilege. Now, the way it goes is, as your identity intersects with other aspects of your identity, you go further and further down the totem pole. So, according to the social Marxists, homosexuals are always less privileged than straight people. So a white male homosexual is less privileged and further down the totem pole than a white straight male. A white straight woman is probably just as far down the totem pole as a white gay man. A lesbian woman who is white is even further down the totem pole again. And if she happens to be of another race, if she's, say, a black lesbian woman, she's even further down the totem pole according to these social Marxists. And this is why Dave Rubin calls this the oppression Olympics, because you basically have these people in society saying, hey, look at me, I'm more oppressed than you, because look how my identity intersects with all these different aspects of identity in our society which are oppressed. Now, this is a ridiculous way to structure society. In this worldview, a homeless white man can be considered more privileged than a wealthy black woman. The reason this is because according to the social Marxists or the intersectional feminists, because the powerful positions in society are mostly made up by white men, and this homeless man, his identity is most represented in society, even though he sleeps under a bridge with a sleeping bag that is torn every night. He is still more represented than the rich black woman, therefore he is more privileged. I've actually sat down with people and had arguments with people who believe this. I know it sounds ridiculous. The idea that you could say that any homeless person is privileged is absolutely insane. But when you categorize people according to their groups rather than their individual identity, then you can make such crazy claims. The social Marxist has the same goals as the communist Marxist: equality of outcome. It is also a collectivist movement. Just as all the bourgeois were seen as oppressive in the communist Marxist system, so too are all the white males seen as oppressors or as those who hold privilege in the social Marxist system. Because of the way they view society, they still see it as a class struggle, oppressed versus oppressed. They've just switched out the identity. They even have some of the same goals. Just as the Marxists wanted to take away people's property, so the social Marxist wants to take away people's achievement. For them, a man is a member of a board not because of his hard work and his years of service to the company, but because, by definition of being a man, and particularly as a white male, his privilege has afforded him that position. Therefore, according to them, he has held down women and coloured men so that he can have this job. Hence, they want jobs to be taken away from white men and handed to various kinds of minorities. Now look, I don't care who is the member of a board, what their race or what their sexuality is. It does not bother me. What should matter is whether or not that person is qualified for the job. But for the social Marxist, they base it on your group identity, not on your individual achievements. It matters not one little bit to these people that the goal of a company is to make money. Because according to the social Marxist, we have to reshape society, and because those who are in the haves are the oppressors and those who are in the have-nots are the oppressed, we need to actively enforce quotas, we need to actively seek to guide and shape society through these policies to force certain people out of jobs, to open them up for other people, to balance out society. Equality of outcome, just like the Marxists. They also have the same disdain for family. Have you noticed how over the last few generations, the nuclear family, mother, father, and children, has been more and more disdained and more argued against, and all other forms of family have been put up which don't create the same strength and basis for society? It's because the social Marxist knows, just like the communist Marxist, if you want to reshape society, you have to etch away at the foundations. The nuclear family is one of those foundations, therefore it needs to be etched away. And they've actually been rather successful in achieving that goal over the various decades. Social Marxists also dislike private schools. They also want to push more and more children to be forced into public schools. They're not really fans of homeschooling. They think everyone should get the same education. Now, in a sense, that sounds like an equitable goal. But the goal of the social Marxists is to get their kids taught the same things by the same people so they have the same ideology, just like it was for the communists. But what makes social Marxism so dangerous is enforced egalitarianism, or to put it another way, enforced equality of outcome. This has never gone well for any society. Just look at Venezuela today. The government in Venezuela a few years ago took over the means of production, took over all the private companies, tried to spread the wealth across the country, and the country is now more equal than most countries in the world. They're more equally poor. They destroyed their economy, and people are fighting for food scraps out of the bins. Just look at all the Soviet states of the 20th century. It went bad in every single instance. The historian Neil C. Ferguson says this: but the history is clear. All experiments of enforced egalitarianism went disastrously wrong, with no exceptions. End of story. So social Marxism is dangerous for the exact same reason that communist Marxism is dangerous. Because when you seek to enforce egalitarianism on society, when you seek to enforce outcome of equality on society, despotic means are necessary. Eventually you get to a point where people are like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to give up this. It becomes dangerous. So we have to challenge social Marxism for the very same reasons we had to challenge communist Marxism. Because enforced egalitarianism has never worked for society. Yes, capitalism isn't perfect, but it is the best system we have currently, and it is the one which has led to the most equity in the world, the most increase in living standards, the best way to spread wealth around the world is the capitalist system. It isn't perfect. Maybe one day we will come up with a better system. But currently, our best system to do that is a system which gives us freedom as individuals, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, and allows us to carve out our place in the world. Yes, this won't work out perfectly for everyone, but it'll work out much better than if we try to force everyone into the same equality of outcome. So I hope this video has been helpful. I would love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment. If you like this video, please comment, rate, or share. This is Matrim's Mutterings, signing off. Catch you later.